How many caregivers worry about working full-time or part-time and caring for elderly parents or a spouse? Research confirms that 1 in 6 people in the United States are caregivers for older people age 65 and greater. Today we're going to talk about how to balance work life and caregiving and why some employers don't have support programs for caregivers, which may actually surprise you. I'm Pamela D. Wilson. My website is PamelaDWilson.com. On there is my caregiving library, my online courses, my blog, and my radio show that I do every Wednesday night, which is The Caring Generation. I do have a program called Managing Caregiving, Work, Life, and Balance that you might find interesting. You can find it on my website. If you're a caregiver, you may be coming in late or leaving early or having to take time off to help an elderly parent, to take them to a doctor appointment, pick up prescriptions, or run errands. The reality is that caregiving, on average, according to the statistics from the Bureau of Labor Standards, takes up 3 hours of a caregiver's day, most days of the week. So on average, caregivers are helping elderly adults or spouses at least 20 hours a week, if not more. And it's everyone of all ages. Even the millennial generation, 1 in 4, 25%, are helping to care for a grandparent or an aging parent. Caregiving will affect all of us one day, if not sooner, then later. Other caregiving statistics. So while 1 in 6 people in the United States who are working are caregivers, that ratio goes up in healthcare professions. You might wonder why. It's because people who are caregiving want to help others, want to care for others, so they become doctors and nurses. Caregivers work in assisted living communities, in nursing homes, in home health, in hospice, palliative care, physical therapy, occupational therapy. Those caregivers in those companies are probably more like 1 in 4 or 2 in 4 people, just because they have an interest, and more than likely they also are caring for aging parents or a spouse. Many times when we get to our middle ages, so 50, 55, 60, some caregivers will even leave the workforce to care full-time for an elderly parent or a spouse. Some of the caregivers, because of their own health issues and their own stress, are actually disabled. So let's talk about why companies don't support working caregivers. The first is that they don't have any data. As caregivers, we want to do it all. So what do? We hide the fact that we are caregivers from our employers unless we absolutely have to tell them. What does that mean for the workplace? That means that your company, your human resources department, has no idea that there are people in the company who are caring for elderly parents unless you mention it. The statistics from a Harvard Business Journal study called The Caring Company state that caregivers don't want to tell their companies that they are caregivers. They don't want to tell their supervisors, and they don't want to tell their bosses. Do you wonder why? Because caregivers are afraid of workplace discrimination, of being seen as a caregiver who comes in late, leaves early, takes time off, doesn't show up for work, who may be less committed, who may be moved off a project that you love working on because your boss or your supervisor doesn't think that you can focus or doesn't think that you can finish that project. That is workplace discrimination. So the reason that there is such difficulty in the workplace between the employers and the caregivers is that nobody is talking about caregiving. The employees are afraid to talk about it because they don't want to be discriminated, don't want to lose their jobs, don't want to be taken off important projects, and they don't want to be judged by supervisors or other employees who don't get caregiving. Because I can tell you that happens. It happened to me 20 years ago when I was working and my mother passed away and my father was having health issues. My supervisor didn't get it. On the other hand, later on, I had a really good supervisor who was awesome, who totally understood. It takes people in the workplace who are caregivers to understand another caregiver. It takes people in real life to do that too. So we have this imbalance between caregivers and the HR departments in companies. What else do the HR departments worry about? They worry about the discrimination issue that the caregivers worry about. So the employers, first of all, don't have employee caregiving programs because they don't know that any employees are caregivers, because the employees aren't talking because they fear discrimination. The employers also worry about discrimination in the workplace. It's a huge issue. HR departments are not always well funded. So while they may be looking at caregiving programs, the people who are higher up are saying, we don't have money for that. How can they not? Because one of the main issues of caregiving is that 30% of caregivers leave the workforce to go be a caregiver. The cost of some employee programs is certainly no more than the lost salaries, the turnover from having valued employees leaving the company. In my opinion, the caregiving programs, the costs would pay for those employees to retain them so that they didn't leave and become caregivers. Another issue in companies is they worry about time to devote to these programs. There are so many digital caregiving programs out there, those on my website, my programs, my videos, all of that, so the caregivers can do it on their own time. They can do it at home in the evening while you're taking care of a loved one. You can certainly listen to a podcast. You can watch videos on the weekend. I mean, there are times that you can access help if you want it. So corporations saying, well, if we get the programs, our employees aren't going to use them. How do they honestly know unless they try? There's also this negative perception about caregiving, which makes it so important, more important for workplaces to talk about caring for elderly parents as much as they talk about caregiving and young couples who are having children, working, trying to balance all of that. It's almost like we support childbirth and children in the workplace much more than we support elderly parents. Somehow that balance has to become even, because the statistics of aging adults, the statistics of caregivers, they are going to increase. And if we don't find solutions that benefit working caregivers and employers, and we can't come to some kind of a balance, there are going to be continual issues in the workplace with employees leaving. You might feel that you have to leave your job. Decreases in productivity because you're spending 3 hours a day on the phone, calling doctors' offices, working with insurance companies, flex time, rescheduling your work. Things like that could help with that if employers were open-minded to it. Also, caregivers, stress. You don't take care of yourselves. You incur more healthcare costs. You raise healthcare costs for employers, which is another reason why employers should support working caregivers. If you're less stressed, your health won't be as much in question. You won't be getting sick as much, which means you won't be using your employee healthcare benefits as much. There are so many reasons that employers and employees must start talking about caregiving. Information about this is on my website at PamelaDWilson.com. My library, my videos, my podcasts, my caregiver support programs, education, and everything is there. Have a fabulous day today. I'll see you tomorrow in another video.